Stop War on Iran doesn't receive any NED, USAID, or any corporate funding. We operate on a shoestring of small grassroots donations, and yet we've been able to organize major demonstrations, picket lines, important meetings, and sent literally millions of email petitions against U.S. war, sanctions, or threats on Iran. And that's all because there's an overwhelming sentiment among working people here in the U.S. against endless wars. And we need to always take that into account. We use our meager resources to circulate information, send emails, make audio podcasts and video and YouTube uplinks with information. And I just want to say that this whole program today will be available on YouTube, on audio podcasts, and in text at stopwaroниran.org. So we urge those here today or listening later to look up all this material and help to circulate it and help us to continue. Because we are confronted with enormous propaganda. When the media 24/7 grabs an issue, when the Senate and the Congress, without any discussion or debate, unanimously vote to allocate tens of millions of dollars to intervene directly in Iranian affairs, as they did again just last week, and when, for example, Vice President Biden assures 3 times in a national interview that Israel has a sovereign right to bomb Iran, and when there's a whole new round of sanctions and threats and deadlines on Iran, then we need to really take time to remind good and young activists of today of the ugly role of past U.S. interventions in Iran, when the Iranian people first asserted their right to control their own oil, their own resources, and their own destiny. It was in 1953 when CIA financed and organized the overturn of the first democratically elected government in Iran, the government of Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. We can never forget this. They used the boycott of all Iranian oil. They used sabotage of industries, shortages, calculated economic strangulation. They consciously helped to create chaos in the streets, inflamed marches that were based on the shortages and the frustration. They used phony media reports and targeted assassinations. And don't take my word for this. Kermit Roosevelt, who was the station chief of the CIA in charge of the operation, wrote a book bragging about U.S. covert operations that resulted in the return of U.S. British-supported monarchy and 26 years of really bloody dictatorship. Again, the profits flowed to U.S. banks, and there was massive purchase of U.S. weapons systems. And then also, we should think back to 1953, because the U.S. and the British claimed to support democracy, but their intervention overturned democracy and replaced it with torture, mass executions, the banning of all popular organizations and all unions. It brought absolute dictatorship and the hated secret Savak police. It was the Iranian Revolution in 1979 that was a historic achievement and a tumultuous time with the religious and left secular forces contending for power. And regardless of who was in office in the U.S. or in Iran, ever since the Iranian people asserted themselves and kicked out U.S. corporations and the U.S. military out of Iran, ever since that massive popular outpouring, Washington's hostility has grown. U.S. imperialism has not left Iran alone for a minute. Sanctions, military encirclement, determination to stop industrial, scientific, and nuclear energy development. So today's program, we're going to look at the role of the U.S.-funded National Endowment for Democracy. Millions of people understand the role of the NED and the USAID in Venezuela and Cuba and Bolivia and Nicaragua or Eastern Europe. The NED has never, ever been about democracy. There's no respect for electoral choices of the overwhelming majority of people in elections in Honduras or Haiti or Palestine. U.S. imperialism, based on 100 years of history, has no interest in democracy for any oppressed or formerly colonized country. Their occupations didn't bring democracy to Indonesia, to Chile, Brazil, Argentina, Congo, Lebanon, Egypt, Korea, Philippines, Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, the list could go on and on and on, and 10 other countries could be added, or 20. The biggest U.S. subversion today, though, is in Iran, the largest funding, the greatest amount of money. And so 4 days ago, when the U.S. Senate voted an additional $70 million for broadcast, social networking, internet technology, radio and TV, all to open Iran up. And this was on top of the $90 million less than 2 years ago from the Bush administration. We got to know what this means. We're going to deal today on the program also with what U.S. corporate power is interested in the Middle East and globally, and that's complete hegemony. Even another capitalist country is viewed first as a competitor and a threat to Wall Street. We're going to look at U.S. strategy in the region, and the determination of Washington to allow not even a regional power to challenge it anywhere in the world. Now, we want to also talk about Iran as the #1 challenge to U.S. domination of the entire Middle East and Western Asia. The U.S. troops and mercenaries of bases and aircraft carriers throughout the entire region that surround Iran on all sides. And if you really have to counter also some of the heavy layers of propaganda to raise any of Iran's many accomplishments, despite the sanctions and the threats. Now, all of us can agree here today that there was a hotly contested election in Iran. Powerful forces vying over political direction. The opposition had 1/3 of the votes. This was confirmed in U.S. polls even before the vote. But it was a social networking sites, Twitter, Facebook, based right here in the U.S., that suddenly were the voices that cried fraud and foul and flooded the opposition and the country with greatly fabricated charges. And we need to deal here with some of those concretely. The examples, for example, displayed right there in the board in the back. Images flashed to millions of Twitter, emails of horrible prison massacre, supposedly in Iran, a whole pile of dead bodies in a heap. But it turns out the picture is a total fraud. It's a picture from U.S.-occupied Iraq. A gruesome video of young men being dropped from a bridge onto cement below, breaking bones, supposedly, again, from Iran, turned out to be an old video from Iraq. Mass demonstrations labeled as anti-government demonstrations, cropping out a picture of Ahmadinejad. They take every image of their own crimes and use them instead to attack Iran. And they use every progressive social issue to attack Iran, while there's no mention of the U.S. position on these same issues. And just as I close, for example, the position of women in Iran, where women are the majority of university students, we can't forget that nowhere in the entire region has U.S. government intervention been a force of progress for women. U.S.-backed feudal monarchies, women have no rights whatsoever to a job, to their own income, to divorce, to leave a brutal husband, no right to travel, no right to health care, no right to their own children. And the dress codes are even far more restrictive. U.S. wars and occupations have brought total dislocation, massive homelessness, and forced prostitution or begging in order to survive. So it's important to say again and again that the U.S. has no right to intervene in Iran, in the Iranian elections, in Iranian demonstrations, in protests, or in the intense debate taking place in Iran on social issues. The U.S. is intervening in a massive way with racist arrogance, and we have to always remember in every political movement here that we live in the center of an empire where there's brutal repression and racism, where right here there's the largest prison population in the world, where right here there's the largest number of people on death row, where there's endless sweeps and raids and detention for undocumented workers, where Homeland Security spies and disrupts political activity. We need to build respect for Iranian sovereignty and self-determination because we're in the imperialist center. So we speak with a clear and united voice to say, stop U.S. covert actions against Iran, stop the demonization of Iran, stop the sanctions and military threats against Iran, hands off Iran, stop war on Iran.